What's it?
Justin, you're on.
Hello, everybody, and thank you for staying with us today here at the Global Hope Conference. We've had multiple presenters today, as we have the last couple of days. And again, I keep saying this, but it keeps getting better and better and better every time we get a new presenter. Who I have today with us is Karen White. She's going to be giving a presentation on sources of conflict. Now, let me introduce Karen real quick because she's someone I know here in Oklahoma. She's a mediator here in Oklahoma. I've mediated with her several times. We went through some mediation training together. She is a Army veteran, so I'm very proud of that, and thank you for your service, Karen. She's currently working on her master's in conflict resolution, and I believe she's due to graduate here in December of 2020, if hopefully everything keeps going and we don't have any more slowdowns. So without any further ado, I'm going to turn over to Karen's PowerPoint presentation, and I'm going to turn it over to Karen. Karen, it's up to you now. I'm going to give you the screen, and thank you very much for your presentation. I'm looking forward to hearing it.
Thank you. Okay, as Justin said, my name is Karen White, and first I just want to add that a little bit of the reason that I decided on this particular topic is through my experience and through the master's course that I'm currently in. There's some elements that kept coming up over and over again, which were understanding sources of conflict. And identity, emotion, and power is specifically the topics that we're going to look at today. And these items resonated with me because I kept seeing the same pattern over that identity, emotion, and power were main sources of conflict, not only within ourselves, but also within conflict with other people. So I felt that it was very important to put this topic out and for everybody to understand a little bit more so they can understand where conflict develops, why it develops the way it develops, as well as the potential in understanding all this, then how we can possibly understand each other and to decompress conflict when it occurs. Okay, next, Justin. Okay, the driving factors of conflict. First of all, we have specific what makes us different from animals or any other living creatures is we have definite core values and beliefs within us. And humans are driven to engage in conflict when these beliefs or these values are at stake or when they're challenged. Shapiro explained that these core values and beliefs are the essence of what it means to be human. So this is what makes us not only individuals, but actually who we are. Conflict among individuals or groups occurs because these values or these beliefs are perceived to be threatened and challenged. And the perception of threat is something I'll hit on a little bit in a little bit later in this presentation. But it's vital to acknowledge that the threat of values and beliefs, whether real or perceived, is the individual's reality. And I think understanding that, I know I'm guilty of this myself, when something is very real to me and when I feel threatened or when I've had my core values or my beliefs challenged, it might not seem like it's important to somebody else, but it's highly, highly important to me. And I think a lot of times when we stand in the corner of our own positions, that we fail to look at other people and we fail to look at that is their reality, even though that it might not seem that it's such a big issue for us. So I think that it's an important concept to remember that the perception or what we perceive as potentially non-important can be very salient and very important to somebody else. Perceived or real threat can stretch beyond rationality, highly affect emotionality, and reach to the heart of a person. Therefore, conflict cannot resolve until they are addressed at the root of where they lie. So although we can come to superfluous or superficial agreements, I believe that the essence of creating true conflict resolution is to find out where these values or these beliefs or these factors at the core of an individual is causing the perceived threat or an actual threat. And so an understanding and gaining of this knowledge is very important. Next slide. All right, what is conflict really? Conflict is any situation in which people have apparent incompatible goals, interests, principles, or feelings. The goals, interests, principles, or feelings that can be incompatible and cause conflict are based on three elements. So when I use the word apparent here, a lot of times where people are so stuck in their positions that they fail to see that there might be a commonality, that the goals are the same, but both people stuck in their same positions have a very different perception that there isn't. So sometimes in addressing that their goals or interests or feelings, both parties are angry, for example, is important in understanding the process and breaking down that defense. The three elements of conflict, as discussed, are identity, emotion, and power. Those are essentially the three main components where people are driven to engage in conflict. Next, please. Okay, more about conflict. So I want to dive just a little bit deeper into conflict before we look at the three components, because I want to give the perception, or I want everybody to see how much conflict truly affects our lives. And although we know that that's something in common sense, obviously conflict is bad, or what most people think, that conflict is very vital actually to both positive and emotional growth, positive growth and emotional growth, and a lot of different growths and interrelational growths in our lives. So conflict is inevitable. We know this. Differences in personality, perception, interests, needs, and desires. Conflict can be healthy. It's how people respond to that conflict that can be toxic. Cindy and Rob stated that there are three basic ways people respond to conflict. They either escape conflict or avoid it, use an attacking mechanism, which a lot of people are familiar with, or there is truly a peacemaking response. And that's, at the end of this presentation, is what I hope that you take away from this, is seeing how we can create peacemaking in the midst of conflict. Disputes can be potentially realigned or resolved through decisions that are made by both parties. However, actually resolving conflict requires a careful evaluation of underlying matters, such as misperceptions, interests, perceived threats, or emotional issues. So again, we can come to some agreements or sort of manage conflict, but true resolution comes to looking at the reason the conflict it occurs, and that includes evaluating both parties. Next, please. All right, the first element is the identity in conflict. What is identity and why is it so important? Well, identity is basically who we are. It's our personal preferences, our traits, our beliefs, our values, our how we perceive ourselves in our career, in our place in society, or in a family system. So whether you're a physician, or you are a farmer, or you're a father or mother or brother or sister, a teacher perhaps, that's all part of our identity, our core of who we are. And we become very defensive when any of that portion is challenged, or perhaps somebody doesn't feel expected in that. So why is identity vital? An individual defines themselves not only by their internal core beliefs and values, but also by external criteria, such as differing social groups and the beliefs and values of that group. So, therefore, an individual may have multiple identities. So what I want you to understand is that there's an all-encompassing concept here. So we have so many components to our identity. not just who we are individually, but also who we are in our, outside or externally. And a lot of any portion of this can make people feel very threatened and create negative emotions. So the primary function of identity is to find our meaning and our purpose in life, which is huge. Our meaning and our purpose is our motivation, is who we are, is what drives us. And so that is why identity is such a important part of conflict and understanding why this works. Next, please. Okay, Shapiro refers to the most meaningful aspects of core identity and ones that are central to the vitality of one's defining recognition as 5 pillars. So the first are our beliefs. The second is rituals, customs, things we do. Perhaps it's how religious sanctuaries or rituals, or it can be what we do as a team and meetings every Monday morning, or what we even do in our family. Our allegiances or our loyalties, our values, of course, and then any emotionally meaningful experience or an intense event can also become who we are or our identity. Next, please. All right, now why is this a threat to us? Identity issues underlie almost all topic and process conflicts and are the drivers of disputes. I think that's a very important statement to make, that it underlies almost all topic and process conflicts. So sometimes when there's a conflict occurs, it's important to evaluate what part of this identity is being threatened, whether it's in yourself or with somebody else. Threats, either perceived or real, to any component of the individual's identity, their self-image or self-respect, can strongly drive negative emotions, behaviors, and behaviors. So obviously this can increase emotionality. And if you the easiest way to make somebody angry, we all know, or to feel angry, is when a component of who we are, or we feel, again, our self-image or our respect has been threatened. When identity or threat to identity becomes an issue, people are less flexible and more likely to engage in disruptive behaviors. So again, that's something that I think, kind of common sense, we already know, but people, I don't think that we stop to really take a true take a true evaluation of what that means, and in doing so can help to de-escalate a lot of conflicts. How am I feeling threatened, for example, or why am I angry, or why is this other person, what about it, their identity might be threatened at the time, therefore increasing conflict in a matter. Next, please. Okay. Is there an identity conflict? So how do we know? How can we stop and evaluate a situation? Well, when experiencing an emotionally charged conflict, we need to go back and assess those 5 pillars again. What values, what belief systems, what rituals? Is this a challenge to somebody's allegiance or their loyalty? If determine if any pillars are endangered, and why is this so important? And understanding the pillars, or where exactly the person's identity is being threatened, is important, because without understanding where their threat is and potentially decreasing that identity threat, an agreement is less likely, or a conflict is less likely to de-escalate. Next, please. Okay. Something that I wanted also to explain a little bit and make a point of is that our identities can change. Identities of groups, identities of families, identities within yourself, as we make changes through life, can also change. So I think it's important to keep in mind, acknowledge, and awareness is a vital point that I want to make in evaluating our identity in others, also evaluating identity in ourselves, and then also along the lines, this identity or threats of identity can change depending on where somebody is in their point in life. So core identity has some fluidity thus can change, but the deepest pillars are significantly entrenched. So some of those main core values are still there, that main sense of identity, but just to have an awareness that this can change. A group's core identity can also change. For example, the group can be the same, but change its guiding values. So think like a big company. They can still essentially be the same, but their values can change over time or modify its essential beliefs. So like a political party. And I believe, again, just being aware what can happen, what can occur, and in others as well as in ourselves is looking at the reason that conflict occurs in the first place. Next, please. Okay, why understanding identity is important in conflict. Understanding identity is important because a lot of how, when people feel that they've been challenged or threatened, they tend to take a stance on they say what they want. A position is a statement of their standards or their reason of wanting something. But a lot of times what we don't look at is their interest. And interest is a very important point in understanding conflict and also in de-escalating conflict, because the interest states why they want something. So when we look at somebody's interests, we look at their needs, their desires, their concerns, their fears, things that one wants or that they care about. And so when we look at that, we're able to see their identity, what they care about, what their concern is, what their fear of losing part of that identity is so important. And in understanding somebody's position versus somebody's interest, why they feel that way, we can understand what motivates them or ourselves. And in understanding their motivations and being able to say, aha, I understand why you feel this way. I can see where you're coming from, and why they're motivated to have there's motivation for a feeling of conflict. Then we can derive empathy, and out of empathy we can gain a different perspective, and gaining a different perspective we're able to find perhaps a common ground that, oh, we're both just something that comes to mind, in a divorce situation, both parents don't want to feel that they're being a parents are very important, but maybe they're having issues over the visitation problem because they don't want to feel like they're less than parents than they are. So that would be a common ground situation. Through finding common ground, we're able to elicit cooperation and then collaboration, which is the end result, and or hopefully the end result to make everything a lot more peaceful. Next, please. Okay, now we're going to look at emotions and conflict. Why emotions are so important in conflict, and how they generate conflict. Well, our instinct theory presents the view that our emotions are influenced by automatic, involuntary, and unlearned responses that explains that potential fear is hardwired into our brain. Therefore, a fight or flight response is a biological protection tactic that elicits numerous responses and emotions. According to Reese, Brandt, and Howie, the basic and most common emotions that drive people are fear, love, grief, greed, joy, and anger. Individuals feel negative emotions when they are faced with either real or perceived threat to their safety, their well-being, or their sense of identity. The point that I want to make in this slide is that the first one and the last one, fear and anger. Anytime we have fear or anger, that's immediately when that autonomic nervous system jumps to that fight or flight response. And so in doing so, that's a lot of times when emotions get high, emotionality increases. So being aware, again, of what we're fearful of or what somebody else is fearful of, what we're angry, or looking at and understanding somebody's anger can decrease that fight or flight response and help to facilitate the peaceful response to conflict that we discussed in an earlier slide. Next, please. Okay, emotions are the driving forces behind thoughts and behaviors, having influence over almost every aspect of our life. That is a powerful statement over almost every aspect of our life, from our individuals, from our work to our personal world. People make choices dictated primarily by either their heads, reason, or by their hearts. There is a physician, I'm trying to get my notes here. His name is Dr. Joe Dispenza, and he's a neuroscientist that has studied the link between our hearts and our minds. And it's actually our emotions that provoke our thoughts. It's not our thoughts that provoke our emotions, it's our emotions, how we feel in our heart, that makes our thoughts possible. So when we have negative emotions, when we're carrying something negative, that anger, fear, whatever negative emotion we feel, that's how our thoughts are going to turn. So I believe it's important to understand that it's in our emotions, and to gain control of those emotions and to be aware of those emotions, and also to understand those emotions in others, that's going to change our thought patterns and our thought processes. Next, please. Okay. Emotions, the unconscious mind is a vast storehouse of forgotten memories, desires, frustrations, ideas, experiences, and feelings that can have an influence on behavior. Thus, the unconscious mind can produce powerful emotions, both positive and negative, in response to the unconscious mind. So our subconscious memories, in addition to present stressors, can increase the amount of emotionality an individual may be experiencing. What this means is to remember that unconscious happenings in ourselves and to other people elicit an emotional response. And so again, I believe that being aware and awareness of, okay, why, if I'm feeling negative emotions, why am I feeling this way? And also understanding somebody else's point of view, somebody else's, what possibly in their past or in their emotions, or have they experienced that's causing an increase in their emotionality. So I believe when we began to evaluate this process in ourselves and others, we're able to decrease some of that conflict, because we're able to understand better our positions and the interests, and being able to sort of start to see other people's perspectives. It is important to express negative emotions. However, the persistence of negative emotions can not only escalate conflict, but decrease the likelihood of resolutions, which we have already basically touched on. So the more negative you are, the more negative emotions that one has, then decreases the likelihood of resolution, which is all more important. The reason to understand this in ourselves, and also understand and potentially facilitate in the de-escalation of high emotionality, so that we can find resolution and we can look to make peace with each other. Therefore, identification of emotions and acknowledgement of their legitimacy can free the party of unexpressed emotion, thus increasing the likelihood to focus on the issue at hand. So sometimes in conflicts, I've absolutely been and had this experience and been guilty of this, you become so emotional, and there's anger from something else, or another experience that you've had, and you find it difficult to remain on topic. So I believe in again, slowing down and taking time to evaluate, okay, what's going on with me, and perhaps what else is going on with this person, that is the key, and so vital to help each other work through conflict together. Next, please. Okay, why understanding emotion is important in conflict. So understanding emotion, I think that this is probably, for me, well, along with identity, is probably the most important portion, because this sort of is it allows the opportunity, so for so many of the possibilities or the opportunities to come out of conflict. I believe that in understanding that somebody's emotional, or this having an emotional response from a memory, from a past experience, or from a position, or an interest that they have, we begin to want to listen to them. And in listening to somebody, we're gaining information. In gaining information, we're also acknowledging that, you know, I understand how that the other person is feeling, or that we understand that what's going on with ourselves. Gaining acknowledgement and information, we're able to empathize with other people, and that de-escalates the conflict, that de-escalates the emotionality. In gaining, in being able to in happenstance to de-escalation, gaining a better perspective for somebody else's positions. There is a quote by Dr. Wayne Dyer that says, when we change the way to look at things, the things that we look at change. And so in sort of reformulating the other's perspective and an understanding of where they're coming from can allow both viewpoints to change and engage in then reciprocity and a difference in perception. And, oh, I see where you're coming from. And a lot of times that other person in the conflict will want to understand then where we're coming from, because the defenses are let down. And in this reciprocity and de-escalation starts a healing process. And in healing process builds cooperation, and then also builds, it leads to collaboration of a conflict. Next, please. Okay, so the third component, power and how this, what power has to do with conflict. So first, let's look at what is power. Power, according to Fleming and Shaw, is the ability to coerce someone into doing something they would not otherwise do by either exercising a means of imposing a cost or the threat to impose a cost. So basically, it's forcing somebody to do something. And so why does this happen? First of all, in relationships where there's a mutual dependence, the question of who is more powerful is answered by who is less dependent on the other, stating the better alternative, the less dependent one is. So when somebody needs to feel powerful, they are wanting to exert their force, and they're wanting to exert their ways over somebody else. Power is often determined not in who one is, but in where they are positioned. And I believe that this makes the point that sort of is led up down the other slides, that in the positions and interests. And we have to look at why people are in a power play situation, what they're interested in, or for example, where they feel threatened, or what the perceived power of threat is to de-escalate the conflict. Next slide, please. Okay. Rights and power, a lot of times they coexist together. A relationship exists between interests, rights, and power. Fleming and Shaw describes the relationship as three circles within each other. Power is the outermost, rights is the middle, and interest is the innermost. Now, what is the connection between these? Why does these occur? Well, the slide says the determination of rights takes place within the context of power, and the reconciliation of interest takes place within the context of rights and power. So you can see how they're building blocks on each other. First of all, what is a right? You know, our right is something that we feel either entitled to, and a lot of times our rights are tied up actually in our identity, or our rights are tied up in what we feel, I don't want to say where our stance or our position is. And those rights come from the interest, what's important, what we feel is fair, what our needs, what our desires are. And therefore power and the need to contain our power, or sometimes the control is also utilized, is within a protection mode to protect our rights and our interests when we feel that perceived or real threat. Next slide, please. Okay, the determination of rights and power frequently becomes a contest, and the competition of who will prevail can take on many forms, such as words, actions or adjudication. Now, we obviously know that powerful or power struggles over rights or over interests can escalate quite rapidly. The competition to determine power may lead to destructive means with the purpose to destroy our competition, often resulting in additional disputes and harm. So with power comes competition. We have to then look at that competition and the question of power, and then we go back to the question of identity and perceived threats or even fears sometimes. And so the evaluation, hopefully, when we can start with that evaluation and looking at the interest of others and looking at others, the interest and the perception of others, we may not feel the increasing need to compete, but to cooperate with each other. Fleming and Shaw contended that power struggles often increase anger, distrust, the desire for revenge, and further harm to the opposing party. So what we have here is a situation then of we don't look at each other's interests. We don't want to look at each other's perceptions. Therefore we engage in a power play and who's right and whose rights are more important. And then we look at just an escalation of anger, of distrust, of competition, and that there's that kind of circle that we see that develops all the time, and it's just an ongoing process. Therefore, we need to understand why this happens in order to break that cycle. Next, please. Okay, why understanding power is important in conflict. The determination of power may be difficult because of matter of perception and objective indications of power. So it might be hard to determine who's truly right, who truly has the power because of a matter of perception. I perceive something, somebody else perceives another thing. But I believe the key to that is looking at that objectively, not from a positional standpoint. And again, this just goes back to trying to understand another's perception, looking at their interests, because sometimes that perception of power isn't necessarily, even although it's a person's reality, there's other realities that can be reached once conflict de-escalates. Resolving disputes by reconciliation of interest alone may not be possible until the rights or power are determined for the clarification of boundaries. So when people feel that their rights have been infringed upon, or their boundaries have been crossed, sometimes it is necessary to reestablish those boundaries, and in a respectful way. And understanding boundaries also enables people to then kind of take a step back and review interest. And even though interest, as the slide says, interest alone may not be possible, sometimes it's a combination of boundaries and interest. The key here again is just trying to look at both sides and gain both perspectives. Fleming and Shaw explain that interest-based resolutions may not occur without first employing rights or power-based procedures due to uncooperative parties. So obviously, if there's parties that don't want to cooperate, especially if you people are mediating or you're trying to facilitate the resolution of conflicts in others, sometimes there's procedures and rights that do have to be employed before you start to look at interest, because people don't like feeling that their boundaries have been crossed, or so following procedures might be necessary. That's just something to keep in mind. Next slide, please. So in conclusion, identity, emotion, and power are all factors in conflict and are often interconnected, one having a causal effect over another. The core of most conflicts are interest-based issues. However, understanding the dynamics of how these three components are intricately related is vital to conflict management and dispute resolution. So, what I have gathered and from studying how interest and power and emotions are all relative is it's very rare that you have one without the other. And I think just reflecting upon oneself and reflecting not only what somebody or yourself brings to that conflict and why we're feeling the way that we're feeling, but also looking at the interest and the emotion of others and understanding that all these dynamics are all compiled into one is very important to de-escalating and making peace between people. The last portion here, reconciling interests costs less and yields more satisfactory results than determining who is right. So a lot of times, there's the old adage, do you want to be right or do you want to be happy? I think this kind of hits upon this a little, yet reconciling the interests, and our interests are those inner core desires, needs. And so sometimes in reconciling those first and looking at those, the loss of the position or where one stands on, I need to be right, isn't as important anymore. Also, Fleming and Shaw state that there's also a less cost and more satisfaction than in determining who is powerful or who is right. So the interest is sort of the core at how true resolution is found. Fleming and Shaw stated their costs were analyzed in terms of transaction costs, effects on relationships, satisfaction of outcome, and the reoccurrence of disputes. So when we are able to look at somebody's interests and thus see the reason that their they have negative emotions, the reason their need for power, there was a finding that in resolving these and looking at each other's interests, there was a huge beneficial, a huge benefit for the effects that it had on relation and overall satisfaction down the line. So that is the end of my presentation. I would like to add one thing to this. I very, in my studies thus far, I do find that something that I believe in is that I have found that through finding, understanding the interests and understanding other people and understanding ourselves a little better and taking the time to acknowledge the positions or the interest and the reasons behind the why is truly the hope to find peace and to find love, even in the midst of conflict. So, thank you.
That's very good, Karen. Let me get this slide off of here real quick.
Okay.
And so we can talk. Now if I can get everything, there I go. There's my video button. Hello there. One of the things that I really enjoyed about one of the things you were saying was the position of power. And I don't know how many times I've been in a mediation to where I have multiple parties, and even if they do or do not have counsel, everyone believes they're right and they're 100% right. And that's very difficult to move forward in a mediation where everyone believes they're 100% correct. That really becomes difficult. So I thank you for covering that, because that really is helpful. Let me hit on a few questions we had come over real quick and see if you can answer them.
Okay.
I've got somebody that asked, can you resolve conflict without first defining identity?
Let's see. So, I can't say that you cannot. what I can say and what I do wholeheartedly believe is that you have to look at, let me pose this question. Look at any conflict. If you can find a conflict where you don't truly, there's not an identity issue, then it's possible, if that makes sense. So for example, if you look in a divorce situation, you're looking at somebody's identity has been threatened. Is it because they were a wife that they're not longer a wife? They're not going to be a part of a society anymore, or, financial gain, or they not, and an example that I can think of, for instance, a father might not be okay with only having his children on the weekends because he doesn't feel like he's a father anymore. It's not necessarily about the visitation. It's about, I don't feel like I'm the father figure that I need to be. So all those components come down to identity. When people have to take a stance in their position, a lot of times reflects back on where my beliefs, where my core, where my values. So beliefs, values, core, all those entail identity. And so if you can find a situation where look at a conflict and not wonder why is this person upset? Why is this person angry? Why is this person sad? You're going to probably find in the underlying factor that has to do with some sort of identity. Because remember, identity is not just about us, it's who we are in society. And so I would say it's not that it's not possible, but that it's more likely when you can identify that issues and feel or find out where that person is being threatened or why they're being threatened, then you're going to have a better likelihood of overcoming that conflict.
Okay. Let's see. How do you resolve the good one?
Oh no.
How do you resolve a conflict between two people who are both emotional?
So I think that this is the case where you have to look at, and actually what you said a second ago, you have to look at their reality. And I think that this is when you remember that when somebody's emotional and they're angry and somebody else, for instance, says, you don't have a right to bury me, look what you did to me. Both those people in their mind, that is their reality. Their perception is their reality. And so people can be emotional, but finding the reason that they're emotional and trying to dissipate those issues and de-escalate that emotionality through acknowledgement, through understanding, and perhaps finding out why they're emotional. And then I think the trick is once that's de-escalated and finding out why they're emotional is to get each other to understand. And that's where empathy comes in. Empathizing, I can understand what your position on this. I can understand why this is important to you. Then sometimes if they are able to understand why each other is emotional, it's not that they can't be emotional, but understand why they are, that elicits reciprocity. And in reciprocity and an understanding for each other is where solutions often lie.
Okay. I have one more here, and this is clearly from a mediator. And they're saying, now I hope I get this right because it's a pretty big sentence, but what they're trying to basically say, I'm going to shorten it a little bit.
Okay.
When the mediator is making those decisions on this is their identity, this is their point of position, this is their emotion, this is why they're doing this, does the mediator need to share that information with the parties, or is that just all internal dialogue for the mediator themselves?
Okay. So the first part of your question, does the mediator need to decide? Was that how you posed that?
Does the mediator need to, once the mediator's identifying those different things,
Mm-hmm.
should the mediator share that with the parties or just keep that internal?
Well, I don't think, because I think when you get it, no, I think that it's more of I don't think it's a sharing, and I don't believe it's I guess it is more of an internal, but I think the point of all this is to understand where they're coming from and go and perhaps maybe ask, that's where questions come in. So, for instance, so why are you angry about this? Can you tell me more about this feeling that you have? Can you tell me, why do you think you have this? And so, as we all know, I believe a lot of times people talk themselves, that you can talk yourself, talk it out for yourselves. And so it's not, I don't think it's the mediator's job necessarily to put that, okay, well, you have an identity crisis, for example, or, oh, I think that you're going through this. But it's recognizing that, hey, I think this might stem from there, and then help the party to, and asking them questions, they're able to make that own decision or that own identification that, gosh, this is the reason that I'm upset. And then you can help them, and I remember that as a mediator, if that's who it was coming from, your job is to facilitate the party, not to lead them or guide them. But a lot of times them and talking it out, they'll come to their own conclusions on their own. And you could be wrong, but I believe that just having a better understanding of where these conflicts come from, you're facilitating the parties to talk it out and help themselves. You're helping them help themselves, if that makes sense.
Yeah, that makes sense. Thank you very much. Very enlightening, and it's diving into the section of understanding why people are in conflict, and that's a big portion of conflict itself. So I really appreciate you sharing this with us today and taking the time out of your schedule, as I know you're very busy trying to get through this graduation process with everything else.
Absolutely. Thank you. Well, and if I might just leave you, I had actually included on the I guess it didn't come through on the new PowerPoint I sent you, but there is a saying that since this is a Hope Conference, there's one a quote that I came across, and like I said, I put it on my other PowerPoint, but it didn't come through. But I kind of hope this brings everything together. But it's by Morgan Harper Nichols, and it says, "Let me hold the door for you. I may have never walked in your shoes, but I can see your soles are worn. Your strength is torn under the weight of a story I have never lived. Let me hold the door for you. After all you have walked through, it is the least I can do." And so I think that understanding where somebody's coming from, empathizing with them, understanding why their power or their emotions or their identity is threatened, and just sort of being that presence to let them unpack a little bit of that and hold that door open for them. I think that's where we find hope and love and peace in each other, and we bring so much more to humanity. So
that's very good. Thank you for that ending. That was excellent. Well, I'm Chris here and letting him end us out. Chris, are you there with us?
I'm right here, buddy. That was excellent. I really enjoyed that. It was a great presentation.
thank you. You have a great day.